It was another early start as we leave Tennoji Station on the glorious Haruka for the last time, to begin our return trip to Tokyo. But it would be boring to take the direct route back, so we were taking a 2-night detour into the mountains to the city of Takayama, which will be a contrast to the vast urban expanses which we have experienced on the trip so far. And we will do so in style. After making our usual change at Shin Osaka, we took a Shinkansen back to Nagoya, where we had just enough time to have an ice cream and board the Hida, regarded as the most scenic, regular limited express in Japan. I think word got out about this train and the resorts of Gero, Takayama and Hida during COVID, which JR Central have responded to by recently introducing new modern trains onto the route, which are nice, comfortable and have all the amenities you would expect of modern long-distance trains. The only criticism I have is I think the windows are slightly taller on the older units, but having never been on them I cannot confirm this. It takes the Hida around 2 hours to travel from Nagoya to our stop at Takayama. Interestingly, you start by heading backwards to the city of Gifu, on the northern side of the massive urban conurbations around Nagoya. As travelling facing backwards is unusual in Japan, they have to make announcements telling people not to turn their seats around, as after the first stop, the train changes direction and we join the mostly single-track Takayama main line. In one change of train at Nagoya, we have transitioned from a modern high-speed electric main line to a diesel single-track line that even still uses mostly jointed rail, so you get the classic clickety-clack as we meandered our way through the increasingly smaller towns along the Hida River. For all you can say about long-distance Amtrak trains, at least they mostly run on welded rails. But even people who don't care about how rails are joined will appreciate the scenery as the train climbs into the Gifu Mountains, passing rapids and hydroelectric dams, of which there are several on this river. The landscape was already enough of a contrast to what we had experienced so far in Japan that our detour into the mountains was justified before we had even stepped off the train in Takayama. I found Takayama an interesting city. As you would expect, it's not huge with a population of less than 90,000, but technically it is the largest city in Japan by area, as the municipality covers a huge area of the northern part of the Gifu prefecture, probably for the convenience of providing municipal services to the many smaller towns and villages in the mountains around the main town. After my complaining in the last part about Kyoto and its inability to manage its own popularity, I think Takayama is an example of how you can do it right. With the city's location and being the host of one of the largest Shinto festivals in Japan, which frustratingly we were missing by a week, Takayama is very tourist friendly. The train and bus station are modern, if modest. It is easy to navigate around the different places of interest, and the preserved part of the city never felt overcrowded, even in the streets that were entirely gift shops and restaurants and were just there to service the tourists. To be honest, it was what we had hoped Kyoto would have been, though we kind of hope that not too many people realise this and go to Takayama instead. But all the cool guys, you can do it. I'll love it. After dropping our bags at our hostel, lunch was Takayama ramen at the ramen shop just around the corner from where we were staying, which I got as part of a set meal that sorted me out for the rest of the day, all of which cost the equivalent of £6, a bargain for us foreigners. After lunch we walked through the preserved streets where we could always hear water as the mountain streams run in drains along the street as they make their way to the Hida River. The sparrows were building nests in the roofs of the houses and the weather was slightly cooler here in the mountains. The town is at over 2,000 feet altitude, so not Colorado high, but noticeable. All in all, very pleasant. We found the Sakurayama Hachi Mango Shrine, one of the most famous in the city, in part due to its location on the side of the hill, which is rather pretty, its history dating back to the 5th century, and its association with the Autumn Takayama Festival. The Autumn Festival is to celebrate the harvest, as you would expect, and this shrine is dedicated to the kami Hachiman, the god of agriculture and fishermen, as well as the patron deity of warriors, just for good measure. The Takayama Festival Float Museum is next to the shrine, and several floats are usually displayed around the city in the districts that they represent. However, with the Spring Festival only a few days away, these were all being prepared for the festival. By the river we found an interesting statue that apparently depicts a legendary craftsman who allegedly travelled to China on a wooden crane that he made. Not sure that actually happened, but they made a statue of it in 1795. We crossed back over the red Nakabashi Bridge and started climbing the hill where you can find the ruins of Takayama Castle. We got as far as the Shorinji Buddhist temple before concluding that this is high enough, and we got an overview of the city nestled in the mountains. On our descent we passed the quirky retro museum, proudly reviewed as a haul of junk no one cared about and still don't care about. And on the way back to the hostel we noticed that there are a series of wooden sculptures around the city, embracing the tradition of our crane riding craftsmen from earlier. The hostel we stayed at deserves a mention, as while so far our hotels have been pretty run of the mill and range from very good to I'm glad we were here for just one night. The Murasaki Ryokan, which we stayed at in Takayama, was our taster of a more traditional Japanese inn. The building itself dates to 1925 and features tatami floors, paper windows and fire pits. But the service is self-catering with a good kitchen and excellent staff who can't seem to do enough to help you. The whole place felt very fitting with our tour of the more rural side of Japan, though I did get to experience why the Japanese have invented so many ways of wrapping yourself around a blanket, because even in April I was under 2 blankets and had the electric heater going during the night, as you learn that it can get a bit chilly inside when your walls are paper thin and there's no central heating. Jims, being a hardy Midwesterner, thought the room was actually too hot. The next day we made our way to the bus station to get a coach for the 50-minute ride to the scenic village of Shirakawa-go. Famed for its Gasho Zukuri houses, the village is a UNESCO World Heritage Site that attracts visitors from all over Japan and the world. The Gasho Zukuri houses feature distinctive thatch roofs, which, in contrast to our room last night, are ideally suited for surviving in the harsh winters in the mountains. For an idea of the amount of snowfall they get here, there were still traces of snow on the ground in April, and the surrounding mountains were still snow-capped. While obviously heavily reliant on tourism, it is still a living village with most of the houses still used as residences. Some are open as museums or shops and restaurants, and on the southwest of the village is an open-air museum with various buildings saved from the region and open for curious tourists to get a sense of how people traditionally lived in this part of Japan. Shirakawa could not have been more different from our starting point in Tokyo. You can definitely see why people would be attracted to a slower pace of life up here in the mountains, maybe looking after some rice fields or selling trinkets to tourists. While we could not cover every part of Japan in only 16 days, we at least got a feel for the side of Japan outside of the megacities. The next day we had another early start to finally make our way back to Tokyo. As the Hida was not running this early, we had to take 2 local trains north to Toyama, where we would get a Shinkansen onwards to Tokyo. Again, this was an experience of proper rural life here, with small 2-car DMUs bouncing their way along the valley towards the plains and the coast. At Inotani we changed trains from JR Central to JR West, which felt like stepping back in time again to Eastern or Central Europe in the 90s, but eventually we did reach the modern and clean Toyama station and the Hokuriku Shinkansen, one of the most modern in the country. Quite the contrast here. We sped along the coast, looping around the Japanese Alps, which gave me something to look at while enjoying my last highball in Japan. We eventually arrived in Tokyo Station and after some shopping, found our hotel near Shinjuku Station. The next morning we said goodbye to the Suica Penguin to get our train to the airport, and after surviving the chaos of Air China's check-in desk, I said goodbye to my travelling companion of the last 2 weeks, and we went our separate ways in opposite directions to the other side of the globe. And that was that, the end of a fantastic trip, the furthest I have ever been from home, both in a physical and cultural sense, and one that definitely left an impact on both of us. The best review I can leave for the trip is that before we had even gotten to the airport to go home, we were already planning our return trip, which will probably include Korea, so look forward to that in a few years' time, or potentially even sooner depending how some other events unfold. But for now, I leave you with the icing on the cake to an already amazing few weeks, as after being denied twice on my flight back to Shanghai, I noticed that our flight path was going to pass very close to Mount Fuji. In fact, we were nearly too close as we flew directly over the most famous mountain in Japan, getting the best view in the house through a hole in the clouds. A fitting goodbye to a fascinating country. Okay, and as a bit of an epilogue, and because I'm cheap, I had a nearly 8-hour layover in Shanghai, a surprisingly boring airport, not helped by the Great Firewall of China blocking nearly every website you actually know of, so good luck entertaining yourself, unless you count relearning how to use the internet as a form of entertainment rather than a form of psychological torture. Fortunately, Chinese immigration helps with this by making the process to transfer as slow as possible, so you burn a good hour just getting from your arrival gate to the departure lounge, completely unnecessarily, as if you just ignored all your guides and travel advice, you'd probably make the transfer in like 10 minutes. To alleviate the boredom, the airport has a small exhibition on clocks, because that's what everyone thinks of when they think of Shanghai. Or maybe it is so you can literally count the seconds away until you can leave. To make it better, this exhibition is at the end of the massive terminal, so you can waste a good 10 minutes walking there and back at a leisurely pace. I don't think the local residents in China have much to say about the planes flying overhead until the early hours of the morning, as there are a slew of flights leaving here between midnight and 3 am, so that they arrive in Europe, Australia and Africa in the morning. By the end of the wait for my 1 am flight, I was so glad to have that cramped economy seat to pass out on, and I did, having the best sleep I've probably ever had on a long haul flight, which turned out to be the perfect cure for jet lag when I arrived home. So at least the story kinda has a happy ending. Except the part where Chinese security confiscated my bag for a day, meaning I was potentially going to lose several grand's worth of expensive camera kit and some souvenirs that had a lot of sentimental value, but thankfully 24 hours later, the bag too arrived. I think I'll be flying through Dubai next time. Thanks for watching.